to join you and have the opportunity to talk for a few minutes about the energy transition and our thoughts around climate policy. As we begin today's conversation, and if we can go to the next slide, I just want to remind everybody at the outset that today's presentation will contain some estimates and projections and other forward-looking statements. The statements are subject to certain risks and uncertainties and factors that may cause actual results to differ. I'd ask you to take a moment to review the safe harbor statement. It's on the screen right now. It's also available online at chevron.com for you to look at further. So if we can go to the next slide, I wanted to start the conversation today with some of our most important beliefs at Chevron. First and foremost, we believe energy enables modern life. Affordable and reliable energy will be needed in the future to power a growing economy and lift billions of people out of poverty. We also believe that everyone is entitled to a clean environment, and we all will play a part in addressing the risk of climate change. As we have for many years, we support well-designed climate policies and believe a price on carbon is the most efficient mechanism to reduce emissions, something that I'll talk about in a little bit. And third, despite the difficulty of the last year and everything that we've been through, life on this planet keeps getting better, decade after decade, because of human ingenuity. We believe in the power of people and working together to advance technology and innovation that will help address society's highest priorities. Just like with the COVID vaccine, no one company, no one industry, and no one country will develop the solution to the dual challenges of meeting the world's growing energy needs and addressing the risks of climate change. So what are we doing at Chevron? We can go to the next slide. Between now and 2028, we'll be spending $3 billion advancing our support for the global energy transition and really focused in three action areas: lowering the carbon intensity of operations cost efficiently, increasing renewables and offsets in support of our business, and investing in low carbon technologies to enable commercial solutions, which is a gateway to being able to deploy them more broadly across the economy. So let me click a little deeper into what does that mean and how do we actually go about this in our work every day. If we can go to the next slide. The work or the path towards a lower carbon to a net zero future works through various phases. And it might be easiest to think about this in three kind of time horizons: what's happened historically, what are we working on today, and what remains for us in the future. If you look on the right-hand side of this particular chart, you will see some gray bars, which represent history. These are our direct emissions, referred to in the vernacular of emissions accounting as Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. The gray bar labeled 2016 were our actual emissions in that year, and that year wasn't chosen randomly. That was the year that the Paris Climate Agreement came into effect, and it's the starting point for much of our conversations and work. The gray bar immediately next to it shows how we have reduced emissions in the intervening time from 2016 to 2020. And those two bars collectively represent historically what progress we've made. In the center, our present activities are represented by the two blue bars labeled Portfolio and MAC projects, MACC. I want to pause here for a second on MAC. MAC is an acronym for Marginal Abatement Cost Curves. They're widely discussed in the industry, and what we do internally is develop lots of ideas, concepts, and projects that have the potential of reducing emissions, the number in the hundreds. And we rack those up from high to low based on their ability to abate carbon. And the ordering is done by how much carbon emission is abated per dollar spent. And by lining things up that way, we can identify those opportunities and projects where we will make the most impact for the dollar invested and drive performance most efficiently in our business forward. And so those projects that are first teed up through that process are labeled there MAC projects. We establish targets to guide this work and to monitor our progress. Our first targets were established in 2023. And again, not a randomly chosen year. That's the first Paris stocktake. That's the first time the actual signatories of the Paris Agreement will come together and judge collective progress. And we've set our targets to be aligned with that framework. We accomplished those first set targets early, and having accomplished them, we published new targets earlier this year that are lower, dated to 2028, the second stock take that will occur under the Paris Agreement. And that guides our actions through present activity. As an aside, progress on those targets internally affect the variable compensation of nearly every Chevron employee, from the CEO right to the person who joins the company on their first day as an analyst, engineer, or scientist. And we believe that aligns activities internal to the organization and communicates the importance we place in making progress in delivering a lower carbon future. As we move forward into the future, we would expect to update those targets on a 5-year basis, consistent with those 5-year stock take intervals, as we seek to further reduce carbon and carbon intensity of our operations. And those are represented by the 2 bars on the far right-hand panel on this slide, described as future MAC projects and innovations and offsets. So we have a roadmap here of how we move from where we were historically to present day and on into the future, as we're working towards a lower carbon, a globally a net zero future. But I want to leave you with the point that these future projects, the things on the right-hand side, are critically dependent on continued technology and innovation development. Those things are necessary because not just at Chevron, it's an issue that's faced across industry. Harder to abate activities and sectors of the economy require additional solutions in the development and advancement of technologies. And it's important that that is approached in a variety of ways. In fact, if we can go to the next slide, as I mentioned earlier, coming together to solve the world's great challenges is something we believe has worked successfully for society in the past and is going to be essential to how we address the challenges presented by climate change going forward. Support for technology and innovation in a variety of forms is going to be critically important. Carbon capture, for example, is a technology that we think is essential to the future progress of the aspirations of the Paris Agreement. We're engaged in one project, by example, in Mendota, California, which is shown in the rightmost panel. It's a combination of 4 companies that have come together in partnership: Chevron, Schlumberger, Microsoft, and Clean Energy Systems. This project will generate negative carbon electricity for the grid in California. Negative, not low, negative. And what's actually intended here is to take almond trees that have reached the end of their useful life, and rather than burning them, which is the historic method of disposal, which releases their carbon back into the atmosphere, those trees would become feedstock for this plant, generating electricity. The carbon in that process would be captured and permanently sequestered underground. We've got a lot of interest and excitement around this project, but there's still a lot of hard work that has to happen in order to deploy the technologies, make them commercially successful in this setting. And it takes a group of companies, in this particular case, the 4 that I named, to come together, make that happen, and bring it forward. And we're really proud to be a part of that. We're also engaged in other aspects of the future energy system, including hydrogen. We have a lot of optimism around hydrogen. We work with hydrogen every day in our current operations, and recently signed a strategic alliance with Toyota, a high quality company with complementary capabilities to our own. And we look forward to working together to attempt to realize the promise of hydrogen. Hydrogen has long been recognized for some very attractive properties, but it's always been a little bit in the future, always been more about promise than being commercially available and being something that society could count on in the efforts to deliver that lower carbon future. And so here's another example of a partnership or coming together of a couple organizations to move forward in that space. And then lastly, I would point out the center and our efforts in building on 2 decades of venture activity. We have engaged in venture investing for a very long period of time. Most recently, we've had 2 funds specifically focused on the energy transition and future energy, the most recent of which, Future Energy Fund 2, was launched earlier this year. And in those activities, we are investing in a variety of technologies that are low carbon, and we think that through these investments and the work with the various companies engaged in these technologies, that we can advance a lower carbon future. And the technologies involved span a range from advanced geothermal to carbon capture, either directly from the air or from point sources, the utilization of carbon for different purposes, nuclear fusion, offshore wind. There's actually a whole host of things. But the broad point here is that the future of energy, in addition to being lower carbon, will be based on technologies that require additional advancement, additional innovation, and that work is critically important, and it needs to be supported with the right kinds of policies. If we can go to the last slide. Policy enablement of technology advancement is important to accomplishing our shared aspirations of the Paris Agreement. Policy ideally should achieve reductions and abatement in carbon as efficiently as possible. By doing so, it is more sustainable. It is a transition available to all, not just to one sector, one segment, or one country in the world. Much as we've used marginal abatement cost curves in our company, you can draw a parallel to society or the economy overall. On the left-hand side of this chart, we're showing a theoretical MAC curve, and these can be built, and many organizations have built them for the economy. But the point being that there are a variety of ways to reduce carbon emissions in the economy, some low cost, some high cost. We believe that the single and most effective policy measure would be setting a price on carbon at the highest possible levels of the economy, as widely applied, very transparently communicated to all participants. And what that will do is unlock innovation, technology across a host of opportunities and allow the economy to move forward most cost efficiently. Now, it would be ideal if there was just one policy that could meet all of our needs going forward, but we don't think that's necessarily the case. There are select situations where carbon pricing augmented by some other things might be helpful. Support for innovation in early stage technologies that are high cost today but show promise. We think that that's important. It's important to advance those technologies so that they might move into more of the middle part of this MAC chart and be more readily available to society at large. And then there are also situations where there might be an opportunity for abatement that's technically in the money, so to speak, but the costs and benefit are separated from each other somehow. And the best example of this that I can think of is building codes. Making buildings more efficient is generally a efficient way to reduce carbon emissions, but the cost is borne by the building owner. The benefit is received by the occupant of the building, not often the owner, maybe a renter or somebody of that case. And so you have cost and benefit separated from each other. And in a few situations like that, you might need a very targeted policy to connect cost and benefit, maybe through, say, a building code, in order to get those things to progress. But overall, approaching a policy with a price on carbon, we think, is the single best tool to utilize going forward to help move the economy in a positive direction, and importantly, to provide support for innovation, the innovation that's necessary to be successful in the future. That future, we at Chevron believe, is lower carbon. We are actively engaged on a daily basis on being a part of that solution, and think that a price on carbon would be very supportive of helping us move collectively towards our shared ambition as expressed in the Paris Agreement. So Vicki, with that, I'll stop and see if there are any questions that I can address.
Hi, Bruce, thank you. Thank you for that very comprehensive presentation, and so glad that you're here and you're with us and a part of USEA. So I have a question for you from the standpoint of Chevron and then other industries in your space. What role do you see for the DOE government in this space? What role do you see?
Yeah, thank you for that question. You know, the challenge of climate is going to require all participants in society to play their role. You know, companies like Chevron have a role, academic institutions have a role, government has a role. The Department of Energy, just as an example, when we think about theoretical MAC curve for the economy and technologies that are high cost today but show a lot of promise, I think that's a fantastic place for the Department of Energy to play, to nurture and support through appropriate programs further innovation so costs can come down and technologies can be more readily available, and then others can pick up the baton and maybe carry them to commercialization. But you know, work in that space, and I think that's also space where academic institutions and others can play. And it's important because the growth in technologies and available choices is essential to us accomplishing the ambition of Paris.
And Bruce, you mentioned technology, and you and I both know how important, USEA knows how important it is. Technology, from the standpoint of low carbon solutions, what technologies is Chevron pursuing?
Well, we're engaged in a whole host of things, from technologies that better detect methane emissions so they can be identified quickly and abated and addressed, which we think holds great promise. The project that I talked about in Mendota, California, we've got a lot of enthusiasm for. We think that holds great promise. We're also invested in another project with one of our other venture companies called Savante, and that company is building carbon capture so it could capture carbon from a stack or something that would come out of an industrial process, not just oil and gas. And if doing so and then pairing that with some other technologies could represent real progress in decarbonizing, especially hard to abate sectors, which are very important to the economy. And we've seen that importance even during the time, of the pandemic, where most of us were at home and doing things remotely. 90% of the economy was still chugging along to support, the response to the pandemic and a variety of other business essential things. And so we have a lot of interest in that technology because we think with success, it has widespread application.
And Bruce, you make me think of something from the standpoint of myself, as I've been involved in public policy most of my professional career, and you on the industry side. It's interesting how public policy drives technology, or does technology drive public policy? Because it's a partnership that we get angry at each other, but it's a partnership that you can't do without, because the public policy drives business decisions and business strategies as well. And so as we march towards decarbonization and these goals around net zero, all of that, it's a partnership. And
absolutely, the companies that are and organizations in different parts of society committed to our shared future, that lower carbon future, I think is important. And I would agree, Vicki, 100% that there is an intersection of well-designed policy and advancements with a variety of folks working on technologies. All of that is going to have to work together. You might think about it as a symphony. We all have to find a way to harmonize and deliver something, and we can do something together that any one instrument by itself cannot.
Well, on that, I'm going to say thank you, Bruce. That was excellent. Thank you for that excellent presentation. Thank you for the time that you've given us today.
Thanks for having me today.
All right.